Hello, this is Todd Luck, and this is a review of a novel that is the culmination of 3 years of storytelling in a plot line that's crossed over between Tarzan, John Carter of Mars, Carson of Venus. This is a book that reveals the secrets of the Edgar Rice Burroughs universe, stars a brand new character, has new elements that it introduces into the Edgar Rice Burroughs universe, and includes elements of an unpublished Edgar Rice Burroughs fragment called The Ghostly Script. This is a review of Victory Harben, Fires of Halos. This is a novel by Christopher Paul Carey, who runs the publishing over at Edgar Rice Burroughs Inc. And so this is going to be a non-spoiler review. I'll probably do a spoiler version of the review later, but this is a book you can get right now. It is shipping currently, and so it's available in paperback, hardcover, collector's edition, Kindle, audiobook, Gridley Wave. However you read a novel, you can get it. And if you order it from EdgarRiceBurroughs.com, they'll throw in some trading cards. So this is the card of Tila, who is Victory Harben's friend in the comics we'll talk about in a minute. And so she also has the backup story. And so this is how you spell her name. So it is distinct from that other Tila in that other franchise I talk about a lot. And if you get the collector's edition, they'll throw in this trading card too. All right, so before we talk about Miss Harben's epic adventure, let's talk about the Swords of Eternity arc. So technically, the plotline began in this comic miniseries, Carson of Venus, Eye of Amtor from American Mythology. This is a prologue for Carson of Venus, and in the back it has the first appearance of Victory Harben. However, you don't really need it because the Victory Harben backup is a comic adaptation of her first novelette. However, it is a really good comic miniseries and cool to own. And so the novels in the plotline are Carson of Venus, The Edge of All Worlds, Tarzan, Battle for Pellucidar, John Carter of Mars, Gods of the Forgotten. So each of these novels really stands on its own and is the next story in each of their series. However, they are bound together by a subplot that involves Jason Gridley and Victory Harben being sucked into a portal and bouncing around between different worlds. They're teleported between different worlds that Edgar Rice Burroughs created. And so Jason Gridley's story is mainly told in the main novels, where he'll pop up for a few chapters before teleporting away. And then Victory Harben has her story told in backup novelettes in the back of each of these novels. And there's also a comic that takes place after the plotline called Beyond the Furthest Star, Warriors of Xandar, where we get to see what happens to Victory Harben after her novel. And Jason Gridley's plotline is wrapped up in a novelette called Jason Gridley of Earth, Across the Moons of Mars, which can be found in the recent printing of Red Axe of Pellucidar. And so this plotline has really acted as a tour of the Edgar Rice Burroughs universe, giving us a new adventure in each of the worlds that Edgar Rice Burroughs created. For new readers, it's a great jumping on point that basically tells you everything you need to know about the Edgar Rice Burroughs universe in only a handful of novels. And Victory Harben's part of it has really captured that feeling of the old Burroughs novels where the hero would enter the world for the first time and kind of discover it. And, you know, to me, like that's really represented in Beyond the Furthest Star, Warriors of Xandar, which really captured that feeling that I got when I first read John Carter arriving on Mars. So all that being said, this novel is actually a little bit different than everything else in the plotline. So why don't we talk about what's in here? And so let's start with this gorgeous cover. I mean, it just looks fantastic. Here's Victory Harben in her spacesuit that she'll get during the novel with her uncertainty gun that does weird stuff, and her little pet companion, Hucklebuck, which in my opinion is just freaking amazing. We've got some flying saucers that do appear a little bit in the novel. We get maps for frontispieces, so we get a map of the Omos system from Beyond the Furthest Star, and a map showing one of the planets that's in that system. And so this novel is meant to be representative of Victory Harben's whole story. And so it actually begins before this plot line, giving you her backstory and how she ended up and that situation where she got sucked into the portal, and then kind of recaps that event. I didn't mind rereading it here. I think everything flows well. I think it was important to orient the reader to the character. And then she's going to come to a couple familiar places, but mostly after that, we're going to see the end of her journey, which involves almost entirely new places that we never saw in the old Edgar Rice Burroughs novels. And so this is not part of the tour of the existing Edgar Rice Burroughs universe. This really is about adding in new elements and exploring those new elements. You know, some of them came from the Ghostly script, but some of them are new as well. And so there's a lot of different types of storytelling in here. And some of it feels like Burroughs, but some of it does not. And that's okay, because as I've said before, you know, Edgar Rice Burroughs was a very unique storyteller who was telling his stories at a particular time in history. And you're never going to replicate that, right? So you need to come up with your own stuff. And this novel makes a very heroic try at that. And so it doesn't have as much action as the other novels, and it has a lot of exposition, because not only is this resolving the mysteries set up in those other novels, but it's also telling you the secrets of the Edgar Rice Burroughs universe, and it's also establishing brand new civilizations with their own types of science and all of this. So lots of exposition in here. However, none of it ever felt tedious to me, and never had a hard time getting through it. There was just a lot of it. However, there was not as much as there could have been, because, you know, when you're trying to explain how all the fantastic places in the Edgar Rice Burroughs universe exist, that could have been a very long explanation, and a lot of it is just giving you an overview and letting you kind of use your own imagination to kind of figure out the details. And so what we get is a very different novel that honestly feels like 3 or 4 different novels kind of crammed in together into one book. But on top of that, you also have a novelette by Mike Wolfer. And this is Beyond the Furthest Star, Rescue on Xandar. This is starring Tila, who I mentioned earlier. And this really does feel very much like a traditional Edgar Rice Burroughs story. And we'll talk about that at the end. And so there's a lot of stuff in this novel, and a lot of different stuff. And so what I would compare this to is a Thanksgiving dinner, like one of those dinners that, you know, your mom cooks, and it has like everything on the table, right? All the different types of food. And for some people, they're going to go in there and they're going to eat everything. And God bless them, because someone should eat cranberries. But there's going to be people like me who maybe have our preferences, and we prefer to eat some things over others. And then there's going to be some people who just come in there and they just want the dessert. And I think that's fine too, because the dessert here is really good. What I think is that no matter who you are, you're going to find something in this novel that you like. It may not be everything for everybody, but I think everybody is going to find something in here they like. Now, let me talk about those reveals. Yes, we do talk about how the fantastic places in the Edgar Rice Burroughs universe are in other dimensions. And then we also talk about, you know, how certain characters like John Carter ended up astral projecting themselves onto another planet. However, these are not explanations that change the old novels. All the books on your bookshelf are still there. Every single word in those stories is still intact. This is only adding to what is there. It does not change it in any way. And I think that's good. It basically, like we've seen in the previous novels in this plot line, it just answers some unanswered questions that we had from those old novels. And as far as those new elements go, I mean, there's a lot of it, right? There we got people in flying saucers. We've got space angels with flaming swords that steal people's souls. We got space gods. We got a bunch of stuff about people's auras and stuff like that. But a lot of it comes from what Edgar Rice Burroughs did. So Halos and the alternate dimensions and stuff like that, Those come from the Ghostly script. Some of the stuff is inspired by the Lotharians, who could create things from their minds in the Mars novels. And then, of course, there was, people who could project themselves to other planets. So all of that is kind of followed up on in this novel and just kind of cranked up to 11. And so I do think it kind of stretches the Edgar Rice Burroughs universe, but I think it's a big place and pretty much anything can fit in there. And, different people are going to have different reactions to the various elements here. But just keep in mind, they're specific to this novel. I doubt we're going to see, Tarzan fighting space angels in his next novel. One thing I do wish was in here, and I don't think this detracts from the novel, but I think it would have added to it greatly, is if there had been a strong personal plot line for Victory Harben's character, just kind of human element to it. I think Christopher Paul Carey did a fantastic job coming up with a backstory for the character and weaving it into the novel, but I rarely felt connected to her in the present. I liked her interactions with other characters, but she just never really felt connected with most of them, and there just never really felt like there was some kind of burning desire in her to do any particular thing character-wise. When I go back and think about the Burroughs novels I've read, there was always two types of tension, right? There was the tension of, will they get out of that situation or situations that they're in, right? And then there was the human tension, right? And usually that human tension was the one that kind of stretched across that entire novel. And that was usually the thing that hooked me. And that was the thing that had me on the edge of my seat the most. And whether that was, a quest to understand humanity or find belonging, or, if a character was struggling with if they could follow their heart as opposed to what society wanted them to do, or if the princess really loved the prince and all that good stuff, that was really what engaged me with that character and kept me going through that novel. And when Burroughs couldn't do that with the main character because they'd already completed their character arc, he would either switch out the main characters like you would do in the Mars novels, or he would introduce supporting characters who could go through similar arcs. So there was usually that element in there somewhere. There was a point at which I did feel it in the novel, and that was about halfway through, particularly my favorite chapter, which is called Hucklebuck. And you can kind of guess that she does meet Hucklebuck in that particular chapter. And there's also a fellow traveler who's in a similar kind of trouble that she's in. And suddenly she kind of has these connections with both Hucklebuck and this other character, and I start, kind of being engaged with her because, we've all been in that situation where we've bonded with someone who was in a similar type of problem that we were facing, and, and Hucklebuck, it just felt so natural for her to have a connection with that animal, right? Because we all have known people who connect with animals, right? And so it just felt right. That was probably the deepest connection she has of any character in there is Hucklebuck. And it worked really well. Unfortunately, the shifting nature of the novel means that those characters would soon be out of the story and we would move on to something else. But I'm very, very glad to know that the direction they're taking her beyond the novel is in a very similar vein to that chapter of Hucklebuck. We got Hucklebuck, and we've switched out travelers, but she still has that kind of deep bond with them, and it really does have that Burroughs feel to it. Speaking of which, why don't we talk about the novelette by Mike Wolfer, Rescue on Xandar. Now, this is completely starring Tila, who, again, is a character from the Beyond Further Star comic that Victory Harben will meet. And this is a story of Tila before she meets Victory Harben. This is a complete kind of self-contained adventure telling you about the character. And so you may be thinking to yourself, even if you've read the comic, why do we need an entire novelette of a supporting character? It kind of reminds me of Tarzan and the Ant-Man. When you open this book up, the first chapter is not about Tarzan at all. It is about a little cannibal girl. And you're sitting there like, why am I reading about this? But Burroughs was able to write her in such a primal human way that no matter who you are, no matter what country you're in, no matter what culture you're from, no matter what decade you're reading in, you're going to connect with this girl. You're going to feel her, right? And by the end of that chapter, I was like, oh my gosh, what happens to the little cannibal girl? And I don't feel quite as strongly about Rescue on Xandar, but it's a very similar reaction. Right off the bat, you have Tila in a everyday situation where she's hunting, and she gets in this situation where we start reflecting on her religion and her culture and the world around her while she is in a situation involving action and an animal battle, which is really exciting, and all of this. And it connects you. You are drawn into this character because you understand who she is and where she comes from, and you identify with her struggles. And by the time you get to the end of that chapter, oh my goodness, I was clapping. I was like, I heard the music from Lord of the Rings, when Frodo's leaving the Shire or whatever. And I'm just like, you go, girl, you go out into the jungle on your quest. And it's just good stuff. I mean, it just has just such a fantastic world filled with all these cool creatures in it. There's actually a really cool tribute with one of the creatures to an old video game I thought was super clever. And it just felt so much like Burroughs. The only way I could tell it wasn't was that there was a female character who had a very prominent action role, and because of the time period Burroughs was writing in, he probably wouldn't have done that. But if he'd kept going, he certainly would have 100% written something like this. I mean, it feels like you gave the ghost of Edgar Rice Burroughs a typewriter. And Tila's people remind me of basically a hippie version of the Tharks, but they also remind me of the Waziri. The way that they live off of the land really reminds me of, how African tribes used to do it. And I just kept thinking, like, man, I would love to see this done with the Waziri. Something that weaves in their culture and all the innovative ways they live off the land with a grand adventure. I mean, that would be my dream Burroughs novel. I'm sure it will never happen, but I would totally be down for it. And I just want to say that Xandar is probably the best tribute to Edgar Rice Burroughs that could possibly happen. And I'm not just talking about the novelette, I'm talking about things in the main novel, I'm talking about things in the comic miniseries, I'm talking about the upcoming graphic novels that Edgar Rice Burroughs Inc. is putting out. I think Xandar is such an incredible, fully fleshed out world with all of its own people and cultures and creatures that it just feels so much like something Burroughs would have created. And I would love to see a bestiary for Xandar. Maybe that could be a Kickstarter goal or something. But I would love to see a bestiary just like we used to have in the old comics for like Mars and Venus and stuff. And so that's my thoughts on Victory Harben, Fires of Halos. And so if you pick up this novel, I promise you, you're going to want to find out what happens next. So pick up Beyond the Furthest Star, Warriors of Xandar. It's 4 issues. You can order them from American Mythology, but there's probably other comic retailers that you can get it from, like if you check eBay or something like that. Next year, Edgar Rice Burroughs Inc. will be putting out a graphic novel of Victory Harben called Ghost of Omos. And there is currently a graphic novel for Jane Porter called Jane Porter and the City of Fire. And I can almost 100% guarantee you, after rereading this, that the Jane Porter graphic novel is going to be on Xandar. So I don't know how strongly it'll be tied in, but we'll definitely get to see a part of that planet we haven't seen before. And so that Kickstarter is going on right now. It runs through December 3rd at 7 p.m. I want to thank Edgar Rice Burroughs Inc. for sending me all the novels in this plot line. It's been an incredible journey, and I have done reviews of all of them, and I've also done reviews on the comics. I've even done a video overview of the entire plot line and all the different comics that tie into it. So check that out, like and subscribe for more videos. And until next time, see ya.